Imagine living in a war zone. This violence has been a reality for the Palestinians since the establishment of Israel in 1948. Palestine has been locked down in response to militant and terrorist organizations, and this occupation has led to one of the biggest humanitarian crises in history.
Before you get an idea of the scope of this conflict, it's important to understand a little bit of this history. After the Holocaust, the United Nations decided that they felt bad for the Jews and all the horrors that they faced, so they decided to create a separate, autonomous state for them in the land that was promised to them in the Bible, called Canaan. Established in May of 1948, except there was a problem. That land was already inhabited by Arab Palestinians, and this caused over 800,000 people to become refugees and flee their homes, and they had no place to go. Naturally, this caused a lot of tension between the two groups and violence broke out. Throughout the decades, there have been acts of terror from both sides, killing thousands and destroying families. The Israeli military has been shelling the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and Palestinian militant groups such as Hamas, a radical Palestinian nationalist group, and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or the PLO, which is a nationalist group founded by Yasser Arafat. These organizations have been committing acts of terror on Israel, such as suicide bombs and car bombs. Both sides are at fault, and rarely do they ever attempt peace.
This is Ahmed. He is a 12-year-old boy who has lived his entire life in the violence that is Palestine. He makes his home as a refugee in the city of Rafah, located on the border with Egypt. Even though Rafah is so close to the edge of their territory, the Israelis occupy it just as heavily as other cities. Tanks roam the streets daily, but at night is when the Palestinian militants can make their move. The Israel-Palestine conflict is, at its core, a religious conflict between the Jews and the Muslims. The Jews are fighting to keep Jerusalem, and the Muslims are fighting to take it back. An important motivator for the Palestinians is jihad. Jihad commands them to continue fighting until they either win or are killed. Jihad is seen as a religious duty to the Muslims, and therefore is one of the biggest reasons that new recruits join the conflict. One of these recruits is Ahmed.
انه ممكن نخليه كحالة رصد على الشوارع على الطرقات، يعني واقف يحمل بارودة من بارود الشباب ويقف. في حالة أي خطر أي شيء يبلغ الشباب، طبعا في مجموعات ثانية يبلغ الشباب إنه في خطر.
It may seem surprising or even horrifying that a boy so young would willingly or even eagerly go to fight in a war he cannot win. The chance of death is very high, as the Israelis have no qualms firing upon children. Generally, they just fire above the kids, trying to frighten them off, but a stray shot here or there can quickly end a life. But ultimately, Ahmed hates the Jews deeply enough that he is willing to take the risk and even dreams of being a martyr. This malevolent hate between the Jews and the Muslims is nothing new, but it is being actively passed down from generation to generation between the religious fervor, martyr reverence, and the ongoing violence. What is there to stop the conflict? Even schools teach their students to hate.
سجل أنا عربي وأعمل مارق راقب الكتف في محجر وأطفالي 8 أسل لهم رغيف الخبز والأثواب والضفر من الصخر وهل تغضب سجل برأس الصفحة الأولى أنا لا أكره الناس ولا أسطو على أحد ولكني إذا ما جعت آكل لحم مغتصبي حذاري من جوعي ومن غضبي.
The violence is constant, but perhaps the worst parts of conflict happen to those caught in the crossfire. The Palestinians are far from innocent, bombing civilians inside Israel. Even so, the civilians on the side of Palestine are punished even more. Israeli airstrikes contribute to the death toll, but more and more people are displaced as bulldozers are used to level Palestinian buildings. Ahmed's family is just one of the many forced to flee after their home was destroyed.
ودار جيراننا كنا في الدار لما دخلن علينا جرافات طلعنا برا نصور في الراية طلعونا برا. أنا خفت عشان إخواني كانوا هنا، إخواني كانوا عنا والدبابة صارت عم المدفع صارت تحط علينا واحد المدفع تبعها. جينا الصبح لقيناهم حاطين مجرفين برا وعاملين سيارة على المسرح فوق العريشة مطبقين السيارة.
Perhaps the largest issue the Palestinians face is a shortage of supplies. In response to bombings, Israel placed many fences and walls in and around Palestine. The security checkpoints through these barriers open and close randomly, and even if one is open, getting a permit to pass through can take days or even weeks. Farmers are cut off from their fields, supply shipments are blocked from their destinations, and people can't make it to medical centers when they need to. Ahmed is lucky, for he has managed to avoid most of these things. But not everyone is so lucky, and this conflict must end if Palestine is to survive.
Make no mistake, ending the Israel-Palestine conflict is no small task. Diffusing the situation will take very careful diplomacy, and even if the outright occupation of Palestine ends, there is still the question of what to do with the territory. To this, there are two main solutions. The first, the one-state solution, is to merge Palestine back into Israel and make one large country. The key issue is that both the Israeli Jews and Palestinian Muslims would have to share the government equally. However, this problem can be avoided with the two-state solution. With the two-state solution, Israel would negotiate its boundaries with Palestine, and both would form separate countries with separate governments. In addition, Jerusalem would have to be shared in order to give both the Jews and Muslims equal access. However, the major bar to this plan is the continuing occupation of Palestine. Both Israel and Palestine are at fault, but this violence solves nothing. Instead, we must all raise our voices for peace between these two nations, not only end this senseless fighting, but also to create countries that will never start these battles again.